Chris, a dedicated firefighter, returns home to find his prized whiskey tampered with. His perfect life with Chloe unravels as he uncovers a betrayal that shakes his world. With cunning and patience, he sets a trap to expose the truth, leading to a showdown that changes everything. Will justice prevail? Subscribe and hit the bell to find out. The sun hung low over St. Petersburg, Florida, casting a warm glow across the Gulf Coast as Chris pulled into the driveway of his beachside bungalow. His firefighter's gear was still slung over his shoulder, the weight of a 48-hour shift clinging to him like the salt air. At 32, Chris was the kind of guy people trusted instinctively, steady, methodical, the one who'd rush into a burning building without a second thought. His life with Chloe, his wife of 5 years, was the anchor that kept him grounded through the chaos of his job. Chloe, 30, was a spark of energy in their quiet neighborhood. As a real estate agent, she had a knack for turning strangers into clients with her quick wit and genuine smile. She'd close deals on million-dollar condos while juggling dinner plans with friends, her calendar always buzzing. Their marriage thrived on balance. Chris's calm precision complemented Chloe's vibrant spontaneity. Together, they'd build a routine that felt unshakable. Morning coffee on the patio, weekend barbecues, and quiet evenings where they'd plan their future over a glass of wine, or for Chris, a sip of his prized whiskey. That whiskey was more than a drink to Chris. His small collection, housed in a sleek bar cabinet in their living room, was a point of pride. Each bottle had a story, a gift from a mentor, a find from a rare trip, or most precious, an 18-year-old Macallan from his late father. He didn't drink it often. It was for moments that mattered. Every bottle was meticulously arranged, the labels aligned, the levels memorized. Chloe teased him about it, calling him the whiskey librarian, but she never touched the stuff herself. "Give me a margarita any day," she'd say with a laugh. Today, though, something felt off. Chris dropped his gear by the door and headed straight for the bar, a habit after every shift. It wasn't about drinking. It was about checking that his world was still in order. His eyes scanned the bottles, and his hand froze mid-reach. The Macallan was wrong. The liquid sat just below the mark he'd etched in his memory, a difference so slight most wouldn't notice. But Chris did. 2 fingers worth, maybe less, but enough to jar him. He tilted the bottle, watching the amber liquid catch the light, and a knot formed in his gut. He stepped back, mind racing. Had he misremembered? He'd been exhausted lately, the wildfires up north pushing his crew to their limits. Maybe he'd poured a glass and forgotten. He glanced at Chloe, who was in the kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables for dinner. "Hey, babe," he called, keeping his tone light. "You didn't mess with my whiskey, did you?" Chloe looked up, her knife pausing mid-chop. "Your whiskey? You know I don't touch that stuff." She grinned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Why, you planning a big night?" "Nah, just checking." He forced a smile, closing the cabinet. The unease lingered, but he pushed it down. Accusing her felt wrong. Chloe was the one who'd plan surprise date nights when he was home, who'd leave sticky notes with silly jokes on his gear. She wouldn't lie about something so small. Still, the bottle gnawed at him, a tiny crack in their perfect life. That night, over grilled chicken and a glass of Chloe's favorite rose, they talked about work. She told him about a tricky client who'd backed out of a deal, and he shared a story about a rookie firefighter who'd nearly botched a rescue. They laughed, the tension easing, but Chris's eyes kept drifting to the bar. He didn't mention the whiskey again. Instead, he watched her easy smile, the way she leaned into him when they sat on the couch later. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. The next morning, Chris was back at the station, his 2-day break over. The firehouse was a second home, all banter and adrenaline, but his mind was elsewhere. Between drills, he found himself replaying the moment at the bar. He wasn't obsessive, not really, but order mattered to him. It was how he survived his job, knowing exactly where every tool was, every exit mapped in his head. The whiskey was no different. It was his constant in a world of chaos. By the time his next shift ended, 2 weeks later, he couldn't shake the feeling. He drove home under a starlit sky, the road quiet except for the hum of his truck. When he walked in, Chloe was at an open house, leaving the bungalow silent. He went straight to the bar. His heart sank. The Macallan was lower again, unmistakably so. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had touched it, and Chloe's denial echoed in his head. He sat on the couch, staring at the cabinet. The logical part of him wanted to confront her, but something held him back. Chloe was smart, too smart to slip up if she was hiding something. If he asked outright, she'd have an answer ready, and he'd be left doubting himself. No, he needed proof. Chris wasn't impulsive. He was a planner, the guy who double-checked every hose before a call. He pulled out his phone and started searching for discreet security cameras, ones that could blend into their home unnoticed. Within an hour, he'd ordered a set of mini cameras, cleverly disguised as a smoke detector and a bookshelf clock. They'd stream live to his phone and save footage to a secure cloud. He paid for express shipping, ensuring they'd arrive before his next shift. As he finalized the order, Chloe texted, "Home soon. Missed you. Dinner at 7?" He replied with a quick "sounds good," his thumb hovering over the screen. The knot in his gut tightened. When Chloe got home, she was her usual self, bright, affectionate, pulling him into a hug that smelled of her citrus perfume. They ate, talked, laughed, but Chris's mind was elsewhere. He studied her, searching for a tell, a nervous glance, a forced smile. Nothing. If she was hiding something, she was good at it. Too good. The cameras arrived 2 days later. Chris installed them with the precision of a man wiring a bomb. One went in the living room, hidden in the smoke detector above the bar. Another in a clock on the bookshelf, angled to catch the couch. He tested the feeds on his phone, the images crisp, the audio clear. Everything was ready. The next morning, he kissed Chloe goodbye, grabbed his gear, and headed to the station for another 2-week shift. As he drove, he felt a strange calm. Whatever was happening, he'd know soon enough. At the firehouse, between calls and training, Chris checked the footage. For 2 days, it was just Chloe, coming home, cooking, scrolling on her phone. Normal. Boring, even. He started to wonder if he was paranoid, if the whiskey was just his imagination playing tricks. But on the third day, as he sat in the crew quarters, sipping coffee and swiping through the app, a new clip loaded. His thumb froze. The timestamp was from that afternoon. The doorbell rang. Chloe opened the door. And there, stepping into their home like he belonged, was Ryan, their neighbor, all smiles and charm. Chris sat in the firehouse break room, the hum of the station fading as his eyes locked onto his phone. The camera feed from his St. Petersburg bungalow played in silence, each frame tightening the knot in his chest. Ryan, the neighbor with the easy grin and constant offers to help with yard work, stepped through the front door like it was his own. Chloe greeted him with a smile that Chris hadn't seen in months. Not the casual one she gave him over dinner, but something warmer, unguarded. They lingered in the doorway, her hand brushing Ryan's arm as they spoke, their laughter muted but unmistakable. Chris's thumb hovered over the pause button. He wanted to look away, to chalk it up to a friendly visit, but the footage kept rolling. They moved to the couch, sitting close, too close. Ryan reached for the bar cabinet, pulling out the Macallan, the bottle Chris had been obsessing over. Chloe didn't stop him. Instead, she handed him 2 glasses, her movements casual, practiced. They poured, clinked, and drank, the amber liquid glinting under the living room light. Then, as if it were nothing, Ryan leaned in, and Chloe met him halfway. The kiss was brief but deliberate, a confirmation of something Chris hadn't wanted to believe. He replayed the clip, forcing himself to watch every second. His pulse pounded, but years of training kept his hands steady. Firefighters don't panic. They assess, plan, act. He closed the app, set the phone face down, and leaned back in the chair. The station's chatter, radios crackling, boots stomping, felt distant. His mind was stuck on that image, his wife, his neighbor, his whiskey. Betrayal wasn't just a word now. It was a weight pressing against his ribs. Back home, Chloe had no idea she was being watched. She went about her day, open houses, client calls, a quick gym session, her routine unchanged. Chris, meanwhile, was 200 miles away in the Gulf Coast heat, battling a warehouse fire and his own spiraling thoughts. During breaks, he checked the cameras obsessively. Most clips were mundane. Chloe eating cereal, scrolling her phone, leaving for work. But every few days, Ryan appeared. Sometimes it was a quick visit, an hour, a drink, a laugh. Other times, they lingered longer, their closeness undeniable. Each clip chipped away at Chris's hope that this was a one-off mistake. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Rushing him would tip her off, and Chloe was sharp. She'd cover her tracks if she sensed suspicion. Instead, he leaned into his strengths, patience and precision. He started logging the footage, noting dates and times, saving every clip to a secure folder. He wasn't just gathering evidence. He was building a case, the way he'd map out a burning building before charging in. The whiskey, once a small quirk, became his proof, a tangible sign of the lie unraveling his life. Halfway through his shift, Chris took a calculated step. He texted Chloe, keeping it light. "Miss you. Thinking about cracking open a Macallan when I'm back. You cool with that?" Her reply came fast. "Haha, your precious whiskey? Go for it, babe. I'm sticking to my margaritas." The lie stung more than the footage. She knew the bottle was being touched, and she played it off like it was nothing. Chris stared at the message, his jaw tight, then typed back, "Sounds good. See you soon." He wasn't just playing along, he was setting the stage. Between fire calls, he researched divorce laws in Florida, asset division, how to protect himself legally. He called his cousin, a lawyer in Tampa, during a late-night break. Hypothetical question, he started, keeping his voice low. If someone's got proof of infidelity, how does that play out in a divorce? His cousin didn't pry, just laid out the basics. Florida was no fault, but evidence could sway property splits or alimony. Chris took notes, his pen steady despite the storm inside him. The cameras kept rolling. By day 10 of his shift, the footage showed Ryan's visits becoming bolder. One clip caught them in the kitchen, Chloe laughing as Ryan spun her into a quick dance. Another showed them on the couch again, the Macallan open, their hands intertwined. Chris stopped watching the full clips. The thumbnails were enough. He focused on work, hauling hoses, training rookies, saving lives, but the betrayal followed him, a shadow he couldn't shake. He confided in one person, Jake, his firehouse partner. Over lukewarm coffee in the station kitchen, Chris spilled just enough. Found out Chloe's been seeing someone. Got proof. Jake, a gruff veteran, didn't sugarcoat it. "That's rough, man. You sure it's what you think?" Chris slid his phone over, showing a still of Ryan with the whiskey. Jake whistled low. "Get your ducks in a row before you do anything. Don't let her spin it." Chris nodded. Jake was right. Emotion couldn't override strategy. As a shift neared its end, Chris made one last move. He ordered a second set of cameras, these with motion sensors to catch any late-night activity he might have missed. He had them shipped to a buddy's place to avoid suspicion. The plan was simple. Install them during his next home stretch, cover every angle, and make sure he had airtight evidence. He wasn't out for revenge, not in the way people might think. He wanted truth, and he wanted it undeniable. The night before heading home, Chris lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The firehouse was quiet, the usual snores and creaks filling the air. He thought about the life he'd built with Chloe, the barbecues, the late-night talks, the way she'd cheered his softball games. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. Now, it was slipping through his fingers, and he didn't know if he was more angry or heartbroken. What he did know was that he wouldn't let this break him. He'd face it like he faced every fire, head-on, with a plan. When his truck pulled into the bungalow's driveway 2 weeks later, Chloe was waiting, all smiles and hugs. "Missed you," she said, pulling him close. Chris hugged her back, his grip firm, but his eyes distant. "Missed you too," he lied, his voice steady. He dropped his bag, glanced at the bar cabinet, and felt the weight of what was coming. Tonight, he'd play the part. Dinner, small talk, normal. Tomorrow, he'd install the new cameras. And soon, he'd know exactly how deep this betrayal ran. Chris's boots hit the driveway of their St. Petersburg bungalow, the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot doing little to ease the storm in his chest. He'd spent 2 weeks on shift, watching his life unravel through grainy camera footage. Chloe's affair with Ryan, their neighbor, was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, etched in every stolen kiss, every shared glass of his sacred Macallan whiskey. Tonight, he'd come home not as the trusting husband, but as a man with a plan, ready to face the truth head-on. Chloe greeted him at the door, her hug warm and routine. "Long shift, huh? Hungry?" she asked, already moving to the kitchen. Chris nodded, forcing a smile. "Starving." He dropped his gear, his eyes flicking to the bar cabinet. He didn't check it. Not yet. Instead, he followed her lead, sitting through dinner as she chatted about a new beachfront listing. Her voice was light, her laugh easy, but Chris saw her now through a different lens. Every word felt like a performance. After dinner, while Chloe scrolled through her phone on the couch, Chris excused himself to unpack. Upstairs, he retrieved the new motion sensor cameras from his bag, sent to a friend's address to avoid suspicion. With the precision of a firefighter rigging equipment, he installed them. One in the hallway, hidden in a wall outlet, catching the path to the bar. Another in the kitchen, disguised as a charger. He synced them to his phone, the feeds joining the others in his cloud vault. Every angle of their home was now a window into Chloe's betrayal. Back downstairs, he kept up the act. They watched a sitcom, her head resting on his shoulder. He laughed at the right moments, but his mind was on the footage he'd seen. Ryan's casual swagger, Chloe's unguarded smiles. When she yawned and headed to bed, Chris stayed up, claiming he needed to catch up on emails. Alone, he opened the camera app. The new clips from his absence confirmed what he already knew. Ryan's visits were regular, twice a week, always when Chris was on shift. They'd drink, laugh, touch, sometimes disappearing down the hall. The whiskey level dropped with each visit, a silent tally of their deceit. Chris's heart pounded, but he didn't falter. He spent the next day at home, sticking to routine, mowing the lawn, fixing a leaky faucet, while Chloe was in an open house. He used the time to back up every clip, organizing them by date in a password-protected folder. He wasn't just collecting evidence. He was armoring himself for what came next. That evening, he tested the waters. Over takeout pizza, he brought up the whiskey casually. "Think I'll pour some Macallan tonight." "Been a while," he said, watching her closely. Chloe's fort paused mid-air, just for a second. "Oh, your fancy bottle?" "Sure, go for it," she said, her tone breezy but her eyes darting to the side. Chris nodded, letting the moment pass. He didn't pour the drink. Instead, he watched her squirm, her quick recovery fueling his resolve. She was lying, and she was good at it, but not good enough. The next day, Chris called his cousin, the Tampa lawyer from the fire station parking lot. "I've got proof," he said, voice low. "Videos. Clear as day. What's my next step?" His cousin advised keeping the footage secure and meeting in person to discuss divorce filings. "Don't confront her yet," he warned. "Let the evidence speak for itself." Chris agreed, his mind already mapping the confrontation. He wouldn't let emotion take over. Not yet. His 2-week home stretch flew by, each day a test of restraint. Chloe sensed nothing, her behavior unchanged. Kisses in the morning, texts during the day, dinner plans. But Chris was done playing the fool. On his last night, before returning to the station, he made his move. While Chloe showered, he transferred the most damning clip, a recent one, Ryan and Chloe on the couch, the Macallan open, their hands all over each other, to a USB drive. He tucked it into his pocket, a grenade ready to pull the pin. Back at the firehouse, the footage haunted him. During downtime, he'd stare at his phone, the thumbnails a punch to the gut. Jake, his firehouse partner, noticed the change. "You holding up, man?" he asked over a game of cards. Chris shrugged, his jaw tight, just waiting for the right moment. Jake didn't push, but his nod said enough. He had Chris's back. The moment came sooner than expected. On day 12 of his shift, a new clip popped up, time-stamped that afternoon. Ryan was back, but this time, something was different. They argued, Chloe pacing, Ryan gesturing wildly. She pointed to the door, her face tense. Ryan grabbed a glass, poured from a Macallan, and stormed out. Chloe slumped onto the couch, head in her hands. Chris rewatched it, piecing it together. Trouble in paradise. Maybe, but didn't erase what she'd done. When his shift ended, Chris drove home, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket. Chloe was waiting, her usual smile in place. "Missed you," she said, pulling him into a hug. He returned it, his grip stiff. They ate dinner, the air thick with unspoken tension. After clearing the plates, Chris sat her down at the kitchen table. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. Chloe's smile faltered. "What's up?" He pulled out his laptop, opened the video folder, and hit play. The clip filled the screen. Ryan, Chloe, the whiskey, the kiss. Her face drained of color, her hands gripping the table. "Chris, she started, but he raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "Just watch." The silence was deafening as the footage looped. When it ended, Chloe's eyes were wet, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. I was lonely." Chris leaned back, his stare cutting through her. "Lonely doesn't pour my dad's whiskey with a neighbor." "How long, Chloe?" She hesitated, then whispered, "A few months." The admission hit like a sledgehammer, but Chris stayed steady. "I trusted you," he said, his voice low. "Every shift, I was out there saving lives, thinking we were solid. And you chose this. Chloe reached for him, but he pulled back. I'm done, he said, standing. I'm staying with my parents. You'll hear from my lawyer. He grabbed his bag, the USB drive, and walked out, leaving her sobbing at the table. The night air was cool, the stars bright, but Chris felt nothing but clarity. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Chris's truck rumbled down the dark streets of St. Petersburg, the weight of the confrontation with Chloe still heavy in his chest. The video of her with Ryan, their neighbor, played on a loop in his mind. Not the images themselves, but the betrayal they confirmed. He'd shown her the footage, watched her crumble, and walked away without looking back. Now, as he pulled into his parents' driveway in a quieter part of town, he felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The life he'd known was over, but he'd taken the first step toward reclaiming his future. Inside, his parents greeted him with quiet understanding. No questions, just a warm hug from his mom and a firm nod from his dad. They'd seen him through tough times before, his father's illness, the grueling early years at the fire station, and they knew when to give him space. Chris crashed on their guest bed, the USB drive with the damning footage tucked safely in his bag. Sleep didn't come easy. His mind churned with Chloe's excuses, loneliness, a mistake, but they rang hollow. He wasn't the one who'd broken their vows. The next morning, Chris met his cousin, the Tampa lawyer, at a coffee shop. Over black coffee, he handed over the USB drive. It's all there, he said, his voice steady. Dates, times, everything. His cousin skimmed the files, his expression grim. This is solid, he said. Florida's no fault, but this can help with the asset split. You want to push for the house? Chris shook his head. Sell it. I want a clean break. By noon, divorce papers were in motion, with instructions to move fast. Chris wasn't interested in dragging this out. Back in St. Petersburg, Chloe's world was unraveling. She sat alone at the kitchen table, the silence of the bungalow deafening. The video Chris played had shattered her facade. She'd been caught, and there was no spinning it. She tried texting him, her messages a mix of apologies and pleas. I messed up. Can we talk? I still love you. Chris didn't respond. She called, left voicemails, but they went unanswered. The reality hit hard. He was done, and she'd lost him. At work, Chloe kept up appearances, closing deals, and smiling for clients, but the strain showed. Her colleagues at the real estate agency sensed something was off. Her usual spark was gone, replaced by clipped answers and tired eyes. Whispers started, fueled by the small-town grapevine. A coworker saw Ryan's car parked near the bungalow one too many times. Another heard about Chris moving out. Chloe ignored the stares, but the weight of judgment was suffocating. Her social circle, once vibrant, began to shrink. Friends stopped inviting her to brunches, their texts growing sparse. Desperate for a lifeline, Chloe reached out to Ryan. He showed up at the bungalow that evening, all charm and concern. You okay? He asked, pulling her into a hug. She leaned into it, craving comfort, but something felt off. Ryan's presence, once thrilling, now carried an edge. Over a glass of wine, not Chris's whiskey, which she avoided touching, they talked. She vented about the confrontation, the guilt, the fear of losing everything. Ryan listened, but his responses were curt, his patience thin. When she mentioned Chris's lawyer, he snapped, "What's his problem? It's just a fling." The word stung, reducing their months-long affair to something cheap. Over the next week, Chloe leaned on Ryan more, inviting him over to fill the silence. He helped with small chores, fixing a shelf, carrying groceries, but his demeanor shifted. He'd snap over minor things, a forgotten dish, a late reply to a text. One night, after a few beers, he raised his voice, blaming her for making things complicated. Chloe brushed it off, telling herself he was stressed, that they could rebuild something real. But doubt crept in. Ryan wasn't the carefree neighbor anymore. He was possessive, quick to anger, and unpredictable. Chris, meanwhile, settled into life at his parents' house. He threw himself into helping them, driving his dad to physical therapy, cooking dinners, mowing their lawn. The routine grounded him, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd left behind. At the fire station, he confided in Jake, his partner, during a quiet shift. "Papers are filed," Chris said, tossing a stress ball between his hands. "She's still texting, but I'm not biting." Jake nodded. "Stay strong, man. You got the high ground." Chris appreciated the support, but the ache of betrayal lingered. The bungalow went up for sale, a decision pushed by Chris's lawyer to split assets cleanly. Chloe agreed, too drained to fight. Real estate agents walked through, snapping photos while she packed her life into boxes. Staying in the house was unbearable. Every corner reminded her of Chris, of what she'd thrown away. She found a small studio apartment across town, furnished but bare, and moved in alone. The space felt like a punishment, but it was all she could afford while the divorce loomed. Ryan followed her to the new place, offering to help unpack. At first, Chloe welcomed it, clinging to the hope that he could be her fresh start. They spent evenings together, ordering takeout, watching movies. But the cracks widened. Ryan's temper flared more often, over a late dinner, a missed call, even her hesitation to let him stay overnight. One night, after too many drinks, he slammed a cabinet door, his voice sharp. "You're lucky I'm even here after your mess," he said. Chloe froze, the threat in his tone unmistakable. She saw it clearly now. Ryan wasn't her savior. He was a mistake she'd doubled down on. The next morning, while Ryan was out, Chloe made a decision. She packed his things, clothes, toothbrush, a stray phone charger, into a duffel bag and left it by the door. She texted him, "Come get your stuff. We're done." When he showed up, banging on the door, she stood firm. "I can't do this," she said through the crack in the door. "You need to leave," Ryan argued, his voice rising, but Chloe didn't budge. She locked the door, her hands shaking, and sank to the floor. Alone again, she felt the weight of her choices. Chris, Ryan, the life she'd dismantled. Chris, unaware of Chloe's unraveling, focused on moving forward. He met with his lawyer again, finalizing the divorce terms. The bungalow sale was progressing, and he was already eyeing a modest condo near the beach, a place to start fresh. He didn't hate Chloe. He didn't even want revenge. What he wanted was peace, and he was determined to find it, one step at a time. Chris stood on the balcony of his new condo, the salty breeze from St. Petersburg's coastline brushing against him. The divorce papers were signed, the bungalow sold, and his share of the proceeds had secured this modest one-bedroom near the beach. It wasn't much, but it was his, a clean slate, free from the ghosts of his past with Chloe. At 32, he was rebuilding, not with anger, but with the quiet determination that had carried him through years of firefighting. The betrayal still stung, but he refused to let it define him. The weeks after the confrontation had been a blur. Chris stayed with his parents, finding solace in their routines, helping his dad repair a fence, driving his mom to the grocery store, sharing quiet dinners. Their support was unspoken but steady, a reminder that family endured when everything else fell apart. At the fire station, he leaned on Jake, his partner, who kept things light but real. "You're tougher than this, man," Jake said one night over beers after a shift. "You'll come out stronger." Chris nodded, believing it a little more each day. He threw himself into work, training rookies and leading calls with his usual precision. But he also carved out time for something new, volunteering at a local youth center. Teaching kids about fire safety, showing them how to use a hose, gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. One afternoon, a shy teen thanked him for a drill, saying, "You make it seem like we can handle anything." Chris smiled, the words hitting deeper than the kid knew. Helping others was his way forward, a path to healing without revenge. The bungalow's sale closed quickly, the proceeds split evenly. Chris used his half to buy the condo, choosing a place untainted by memories of Chloe. He kept it simple, just a couch, a bed, a small TV, each item a choice he made alone. He didn't check the old camera feeds anymore. The USB drive with the footage sat in a locked drawer, a relic of a life he'd left behind. Chloe's texts had stopped, and he hadn't responded to a single one. Silence was his boundary, and it brought him peace. Across town, Chloe's life was a stark contrast. The studio apartment she'd rented after leaving the bungalow felt like a cell, its bare walls a daily reminder of her mistakes. She'd ended things with Ryan after his temper turned threatening, his final outburst, slamming her apartment door and yelling about her drama, cementing her decision. Alone now, she faced the fallout of her choices. At the real estate agency, she kept up a professional front, closing deals with a forced smile, but the gossip followed her. Colleagues whispered about her split with Chris, about Ryan's car no longer parked outside her place. Clients sensed her distraction, and her sales dipped adding pressure to an already fragile existence. Chloe tried to fill the void. She signed up for an online marketing course, hoping to boost her career, but her focus wavered. Nights were the hardest, scrolling through old photos of her and Chris, their barbecues, their beach walks. She'd type out messages to him, long apologies she never sent, knowing they wouldn't change anything. The weight of her betrayal settled in, not just for what she'd done to Chris, but for what she'd done to herself. She'd traded a solid marriage for a fleeting affair, and now she had neither. Desperate for a fresh start, Chloe started therapy, a decision born from exhaustion. In weekly sessions, she unpacked her loneliness, her impulsiveness, the choices that led her to Ryan. It was slow, painful work, but it gave her a flicker of hope. She began journaling, a habit to process the guilt that kept her awake. One entry read, "I broke something good, and I can't fix it, but I can't keep breaking myself." It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a step toward accountability. Meanwhile, Chris reconnected with old friends, guys from his high school baseball team who drifted away during his marriage. They met for pickup games, shared stories over wings at a local bar, and reminded him there was life beyond the pain. One friend, now a paramedic, invited him to join a community-run club. Chris showed up, not for the exercise, but for the camaraderie. Running along the beach, trading jokes with strangers turned friends, he felt lighter, like he was reclaiming pieces of himself. The divorce finalized without drama. Chloe didn't contest the terms, and the lawyers handled the rest. Chris heard through a mutual friend that she'd moved permanently to the studio, letting the bungalow's memories fade with its sale. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. His focus was forward, on his condo, his job, the kids at the youth center who looked up to him. One evening, as he grilled burgers for his parents, his mom touched his arm. "You're doing all right, aren't you?" she asked. Chris nodded. "Getting there," he said, and meant it. Chloe's path was lonelier. Without Ryan, without Chris, she leaned on small routines to survive: work, therapy, journaling. She avoided social events, knowing her old friends had pulled away. The town's gossip had quieted, but the damage lingered. She took on extra clients, hoping to rebuild her reputation, but each sale felt hollow. One night, staring at her laptop, she typed a final unsent message to Chris. "I know you'll never read this, but I'm sorry. I hope you're happy." She deleted it, closed the laptop, and cried. Some things couldn't be undone. Months later, Chris stood on his condo's balcony, watching the sunset over the Gulf. The youth center had asked him to lead a summer program, and he'd said yes. His condo was starting to feel like home, each choice, new books on the shelf, a framed photo from a firehouse barbecue, a marker of his new life. He didn't think about Chloe much anymore, not out of spite, but because he'd chosen to move on. His integrity, his work, his family, they were enough. Chloe, in her studio, kept showing up to therapy, kept writing, kept working. She wasn't okay. Not yet, but she was trying. The consequences of her actions were her own to carry, a lesson etched in the silence of her nights. For Chris, the future was open, built on the strength of his choices. For Chloe, it was a slower climb, shaped by the truth she couldn't escape. Betrayal breaks more than trust. It breaks the betrayer, too.